On this episode of Money and Power, the 5 laws of relationship. But first, Kid Ink.
I got the money and the power. Yeah. Once you get a little, they just wanna take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long. Can't get enough, what is you on? Yeah. Really ain't nothing I could drop that. Wake up in the morning, make it all okay. It's nothing to get it poppin', wanna roll up and away, here we go. Now Martin had a dream, I've been dreaming about go. Tell him I just want
Welcome to episode 18 of Money and Power, our weekly look at questions related to finance, politics, and culture. I'm your host, Nathan Martin, and I'm all alone. Nobody is joining me. The trio of talk, the triad of the tittle-tattle, and the triumvirate of the tete-a-tete have taken a little bit of a hiatus this week, as we had gotten a lot of feedback that people said, we really liked the series, but we'd like it in one form so we don't have to rewind and fast forward through the podcasts. Could you get that to us? So we decided to do kind of a bottle episode for episode 18 and do that for those who had requested it. So what you are going to hear is all 5 parts of my talk on leadership, specifically dealing with the 5 laws of relationship. So without further ado, here you go. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you about something that is very important to me and something that I think that I have unlocked to better help you guys achieve success in what you're trying to achieve success in. Some of you are here because you're wanting to be a better leader for your team, or you're trying to lead your business better. Some of you are here because you want to improve the relationships with your spouse or maybe with your children. And others just figured that this was an interesting talk and discussion, and you thought you might be able to learn something, and you're here. And so I appreciate you guys being here as well. I believe in talking about the 5 laws of relationship, which is what we're going to be talking about over the next few hours. I believe that talking about the 5 laws of relationship is integral to achieving maximum success in your relationships, whether they're business relationships, whether there are parent relationships, whether they are spousal relationships, any relationship in your life. I firmly believe this, and I appreciate you coming out. But first, before we get into it, I kind of want to give an introduction. Life is about juxtapositions. And in no area of life is this clearer than in our relationships. In our relationships, there are 2 different roads that we can travel in business and life. Now, one road is based off of the transactional. Everything exists as a transaction, and there is usually a winner and a loser. The other is a road based in the relational. Everything exists in relation to each other. There may be winners and losers, but in general, everything is about furthering the relationship between 2 things, not a tick mark of who won. Now, there are obviously pros and cons to each of these roads. And while this talk is going to talk about the relational, how we need to be more relational and less transactional, it is important to note that the transactional happens. Competition matters a great deal, and having winners and losers is not in itself a bad thing. So I don't want you to think that this book is just all mushy-gushy and we shouldn't have this competition. There should be no winners and losers and, we're all winners and that kind of thing. That's not it. But competition without great sportsmanship is an eyesore, okay? And we understand this in athletic competition. And it exists that way because someone cared too much about the transactional and nothing for the relational. In other words, they cared more about the temporal and not the eternal. Right? Now, that is not to say that merely having a relationship means that you are relational in your thinking. Nor is someone who engages in a transaction transactional in their thinking. So the way that I always sum this up is there a way to win well? Well, I believe the answer to that is yes. And there is also a way to succeed while destroying everyone beside oneself. Now, fulfillment aside, we have all seen many an athlete, a billionaire, and a person succeed, but at great cost. Transactionally, they won. But relationally, they lost. Now, even on our own streets, we see men and women with soaring careers, but divorces, estranged children, and distant families in their wake. We see CEOs with massive companies, but the people inside that company, they may respect them, quote unquote, because they are the leader of the company, but they do not respect them on a personal level because they are a jerk, and they have devoted themselves to the transaction and not the relational. Now, in this talk, we are obviously going to look at the 5 laws of relationship, but we're also going to glance at the 5 laws of the transactional. Because for every law of human interaction, there is an equal and opposite law, and that we as humans don't completely fail across the board. You can be relational in one sense and transactional in another. And by outlining the laws in both these spheres, the goal is for you to be able to improve where you need to improve. I know that in my own personal life, I have not hit the target in every area. And I want to point that out. I fail at these on a regular basis. These are not meant to be like, hey, I'm the poobah on the mountaintop coming down with the 2 tablets here. Okay, that's not the point of this. The point is that we all have work to do, and hopefully you're able to say, I'm really good at this one law of relation, but in this other one, I really lean towards the transactional, so I'm able to go. Now, so where did I get these laws? You will see that many of these are precepts that I pulled from Scripture, but I do believe that they are universal in their application. And I believe there is great wisdom in understanding human nature, and what Scripture says about our relationships has great meaning and application, even for those who don't believe in certain religious dogma. So if you're here today and you are not a Christian, you don't believe in the Bible, I still believe that there's wisdom in some of these things, and I believe that you can pull some wisdom from what is being talked about. And so I hope that is able to speak to you. I do come from a particular viewpoint, but my hope is that you embrace the wisdom, even if you may disagree with the source. So with that, we're going to talk about the first law of relationship. The first law of relationship is pretty simple. It's the golden rule. Now, all of us have heard the golden rule, but for some of who may have not, here is, in a nutshell, the golden rule. This comes from Matthew 7:12 in the New Testament. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Now, usually, someone doesn't start with something that quote unquote sums up all the law and the prophets. But the golden rule is the most commonly used and misunderstood rule there is when it comes to our human relationships. And so, as with most things, the issue at stake here isn't the rule itself necessarily, but the application. So that's what we're going to talk about. The first thing we're going to talk about is what the golden rule is not about. The golden rule is not about anyone else's behavior. Now, our sense of fairness and justice dictates that someone should be treated how they treat others, right? It is almost like an eye for an eye type deal. And for all the tropes about revenge and forgiveness, we love watching someone get their comeuppance. Whole movie plots, screenplays, novels, songs, news stories are about the bully getting their just desserts. All right? And we just gobble those up. We love those. This is natural and not on its face bad or improper, but we should want to see justice done. But vigilante justice is seen by a civilized society as untoward, even if justice is done. And why? Because taking the law into our own hands is one step from anarchy. And so while we loathe the vigilante, each one of us do this in a microform every single day. So we hear this kind of talked about, well, so-and-so hurt others, so I can hurt them. Or more prescient on this is, so-and-so treats others this way, so they must want to be treated this way, right? But in the end, the golden rule says nothing about how others are treating you. There are no asterisks. There are no fine print. It is not about how others are acting. So what we deem from this is that the golden rule is about my behavior. And this is not about justice, this is about actions. My actions. If I wouldn't want to be treated in a certain way, I shouldn't treat anyone that way. Period. No asterisks, no fine print. If I wouldn't want a contractor ripping me off, why would I rip off somebody? If I wouldn't like gossiping about somebody on Facebook, why would I gossip about somebody on Facebook? Whether they deserve it or not is not a question for considering, because that has nothing to do with the practical application of the golden rule. Which leads to the most difficult lesson. I am only in control of one person. Myself. I can't control others' actions, but I can control my own. I can't control how others will treat me, but I can control how I treat others. You can never justify ill behavior towards others based off of what they are doing to you, because in the end, this application is about how we want to be treated. Now, the kind of the outcome of this is the rules of relationship. People cannot always trust that they will be treated well. In fact, a lot of times we won't. But we can always establish a relationship of trust that we are going to treat them how we want to be treated. And that trust, you'll hear this over and over again, trust is the currency for relationship. And in the chance that you are mistreated, your friends will end up coming to your defense more readily and fuller of energy because they know that you didn't provoke the mistreatment. In other words, they see the injustice and they'll try to fix that justice on your behalf because you'll have people in your corner. I can imagine no worse feeling than suffering a valley moment and doing that alone because those feel that I've deserved it or I've provoked it. So that's the first law of relationship, the golden rule. Now, let's talk about the first law of transaction. It's the misapplication of justice and reciprocation. I hear this all the time in my household, and for you parents out there, you know that you hear it all the time as well. Well, she did it to me. Gets yelled in my household always through tears, and it is a refrain that is often heard in a household with multiple children. Something had been taken, a fight ensued, and vigilante justice had been carried out. And, our reaction, though, isn't that that's all good, right? We're thinking, of course not. But that is only because you think children are involved. And when I gave that example, children were involved. But that is the mindsets carried out in everyday lives constantly. And it is destroying the foundations of relationships, and we don't even know it. There is definitely a proper place for justice, retribution, and atonement. I want to make that clear. But you won't hear me ever argue otherwise. But too often we take these matters in our own hands. And we often don't know the full context of what is happening. We judge others quickly. And we withhold mercy when we demand it, but we demand it on our behest. And it is simply because societally we have forgotten that the actions first start with me. And I can treat others how I want to be treated. The second law of relationship. Empathy is the gateway to relationship. The precept from this comes from Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. That seems so simple, right? Rejoice when others rejoice, and when they mourn, we mourn. But it really isn't that simple. Admittedly, most of us are really good at the latter. When people experience loss, we are generally good at the pretense of mourning with them. But let me ask you this question. Getting sympathy from a stranger or getting empathy from a friend, which is better. So our first lesson of this is the order is important. Why is the harder task in this dynamic put first? And I think it is that way for a reason. So to explain, let me offer an example. There are two coworkers who were hired at the same time. Because of this, they became friends. They both are pretty even in their performance, but one just seems to have the Midas touch and gets promoted time and time again. The one friend has some bitterness and jealousy, and that slowly seeps into their relationship. And pretty soon, the promoted friend doesn't even tell his friend about good news in his life anymore, because there just isn't a reason to upset the apple cart, because he knows it upsets them. Pretty soon, that promoted friend doesn't tell him much of anything. And years later, the one who was not promoted finds out on Facebook that the other's mom has died. Now, he offers thoughts and prayers on his wall, just like everybody else. Now, that relationship did not hinge on the humility of the promoted. It fundamentally hinged on the attitude of the other friend. If he had rejoiced in his friend's success, he would have been there to minister to his friend when he needed it most. But when we choose to not rejoice when others rejoice, we will not be offering empathy as a friend, but merely sympathy as a stranger. And that's not what's needed. Now, the second lesson of this is obviously that mourning when others mourn is more than mere thoughts and prayers. Now, simply put, empathy is harder than sympathy, because it forces you to feel and to minister to someone on a different level. Now, I'm not opposed to thoughts and prayers, but when a friend needs someone's shoulder to cry on, it requires actual presence and understanding. Indeed, being there is most of the battle. I've heard it said that Job had the best friends until they opened their mouths, right? How true. Most of us know the story of Job. Job was wealthy, and the devil claimed that he was just faithful because of his blessing, so God let him take away everything. In his despair, some friends visit them. At first, they sit and they listen, they're comforting, and then they try to help. And it isn't very helpful at all. And if you read that account, you'll understand why it wasn't helpful, because they weren't just a presence of empathy. Which leads us to the second law of transaction. An inch deep and a mile wide isn't good enough. Well, how long do I have to be there to not make mother mad? Joe stated emphatically to his wife. I don't know, honey. 2 hours tops, came the reply. And just like that, they were out the door to another Thanksgiving traditional meal. And this is something that plays out in America over and over again. Meaningful empathy is not achieved in surface-level relationships. Man, this is an important nugget to grasp. I hope you understand that. Meaningful empathy is not achieved in surface-level relationships. Transactional thinking is always trying to make your deep relationships shallower. Relational thinking is always trying to make your shallow relationships deeper. And if you are starting to believe that this world of transaction is a lonely one, you are starting to get the picture. But it happens to all of us. Family gatherings become mere obligation, not desire. You start thinking in increments of time as what is a bare minimum. How much do I have to be at home before my wife will leave me? The transactional will say that an inch deep and a mile wide is good enough because you don't need anything more to make the deal. Let's go ahead and throw just an annual retreat to make our employees feel special this one time. Do we even have to do an annual retreat? Maybe we just do a conference call. We're always looking at the bare minimums. Just do what is needed, not what meets the other's needs. But the sad reality is, when you think in terms of minimums, you often miss the mark. You don't hit it. The time you thought was good enough for your kids, it wasn't. Your wife, they left you. Your business got taken away, destroyed. Minimalist thinking and relationships don't mix. But more fundamentally, It's about what goes around also comes around, right? And the sad thing to understand and sad thing to grasp is that when you look around, you realize you have these shallow relationships and something bad happens to you, there is no one to minister to you. There is no one's shoulder that you can cry on. There is no one who has rejoiced when you rejoice, and no one who can mourn when you mourn. And so then you become just another successful statistic, begging for sympathy from strangers because you have no empathy to get from friends. Which leads us to the third law of relationship. Show yourself friendly. And this comes from Proverbs 18:24. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And so what are we talking about here? We're talking about mutual benefit. You know, mutual benefit is an economic principle that means a win-win situation. Relational development means always looking for mutual benefit. We are always looking to add value to others around us. Now, do your friends, so I'm going to ask a simple question, do your friends feel that they are in a win-win situation with you? What value do you try to offer them on a regular basis? So the first lesson here is that sore losers never prosper. All right? Especially when it comes to celebrating a person's success. So we talked a little bit about rejoicing when others rejoice, and so this is kind of a branch off of that. A lot of us are very competitive by nature, especially if you have a business. If you're an entrepreneur in this room, you're trying to lead people, you're competitive by nature. Now, we talked about that competition is not bad. That sometimes there are winners and losers. That's not bad. But the point of relationship is not quote unquote winning. The point of relationship is relationship. You know, a marriage that starts keeping score is a marriage that is headed towards disaster. And a friendship that starts keeping score is not really a friendship for long. But when you make the conscious decision to celebrate other people's victories and show yourself friendly, it allows you to focus on what you need to do in your life without keeping up with the Joneses or your friend or your coworker. And the greatest thing is that you will still be around when your friends and coworkers really need you. And they need you when tragedy strikes. We talked about this, mourning with others mourn. So this is just an extension of that. But showing yourself friendly will lead to that friendship. Now, lesson number 2 is a lot of times people who are lonely for a reason. Now, this one stings. But the lonely people that I've encountered have typically had quote-unquote personality issues or some other excuse of why they are that way. What I see most of the time is a harsh reality. A recluse or someone who has chosen to meet those around them as things to be conquered and not relationships to be maintained. Again, it is a recluse or someone who has chosen to meet those around them as things to be conquered and not relationships to be maintained. Man, that's harsh. But a person who shows himself friendly will have friends. You know, I tell my kids all the time when you're in a new environment and they're like, well, I'm having trouble making friends. I'm like, are you showing yourself friendly? Well, I don't know. Are you talking to are you ministering to, are you talking to the person who other people aren't talking to? Are you reaching out? Are you involving yourself? Are you imparting yourself? Are you adding value to those around you? In short, if you were to disappear tomorrow, would others miss the value and contribution that you have added? And that's harsh. But none of us want to be lonely. Truly lonely. But a lot of time business leaders they're the loneliest people in their company. And a lot of that is because, we've been told this lie in business and leadership that, you shouldn't be friends with those that are underneath you, that you should maintain a level of separation. And why? Why was that talked about? Why is that talked about as an actual leadership benefit? Because that works when transaction is the name of the game. Because if you have distance, it's easy to fire somebody. If you have distance, it's easy to make a quote-unquote business decision regardless of who it affects or destroys. But if you have proximity, if you have closeness, if you have friendship, those decisions become more and more and more difficult. But relationship cares about relationship, not winning. Which leads us to our third law of transaction. Rejecting relationship is the same as embracing transaction. Wow. And what this simply means is that you don't have to embrace a transactional mindset, because I guarantee you there are people out in this audience today who are saying, you know what? I don't have a transactional mindset. I love people. I don't have a transactional mindset. I'm not a business leader. I'm not out there trying to rake people over the coals. But you realize in your life you are not embracing relationship. You're not embracing imparting value into others around you. And what I'm trying to get through today is that if you are not embracing relationship, so if you are rejecting relationship, then the default is that you are embracing transaction, whether you realize it or not. It is a dichotomy. There are two choices, relational or transactional. And if you are rejecting relationship, you are embracing transaction by default. Relationships can be messy and there certainly can be pain, but it is important to note that one simply cannot be passive and expect relationship to happen. There simply is no neutral in relationship building. You are either growing or you are dying in your relationship. You are either growing or you are dying in your relationships. And the only way to grow is the relational. The quickest way to kill your relationships is the transactional. Which leads us to our fourth law of relationship. Embrace community. Now, the keys from this come from Proverbs 27:6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And also in 1 Corinthians, for the body is not one member, but many. If the foot shall say, because I'm not the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? That there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. From 1 Corinthians 12. Man, powerful stuff about community and the importance of it. Walk into any office environment, from the Pentagon to industry, and you will likely see artwork with pithy quotes and principles on teamwork, working together, and community. Why the emphasis? Because in a country that brought about rugged individualism and has embraced isolationism as a foreign policy concept, we tend to not embrace the needs of others above that of our own. We simply don't do a good job of embracing community. And this is especially true today, as we've moved away from this idea of community. Now, I will caution that this has zero to do with being extroverted versus introverted. This is not about crowds or people. This is about the deeper underlying things that form a community. The bonds of shared values, similar goals, and shared sacrifice are the driving values of community beyond mere numbers. And we know that community is important. And a relational mindset will value that community. Now, there are a couple lessons we learned from this. First lesson is that we need each other. One of the greatest lies we believe is that we get to the places we go without those around us. Nobody is an island unto themselves. We are both positively and negatively affected by those around us. But deeper is the fact that we need those around us. Babies will die without touch, even if they're fed and otherwise taken care of. Those in strong family units have more favorable outcomes than those outside of it. Strong church communities, in turn, affect their larger communities in better ways. We are designed for community. And businesses whose employees are all working together as a strong organizational unit, man, they thrive. Depriving that community is one of the worst punishments that we can actually give somebody. Solitary confinement has even been challenged as maybe being cruel and unusual. Some have compared it to torture, a punishment that goes beyond the bounds of our morals. And why? Because we value community. We need that community. And when you are relational, you are going to value that community. And we are simply stronger together. Some of the greatest pledges have been when one group or individual pledges themselves to a larger group. Our forefathers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We have heard tropes of a multi-threaded cord being stronger than three separate strands, and the benefits of engaging with community exponentially increases our effectiveness. Yet many of us still prefer to be lone wolves, out on our own, with no care of the larger community and its contacts. Man. And we're missing something. Lesson 2 is that when we are relational, we value the input and we value that community. And we don't get to where we are by ourselves. And when we start thinking that, we put the needs of ourselves above that of the community, disastrous effects can occur. We have to understand and come to a realization that the community is important to our formation, but also the community needs us for that formation. The community is a symbiotic relationship, if you will. It is a give and take. It necessitates multiple people pushing in the same direction. And that is only achieved through relational thinking. Which leads us to the fourth law of transaction. Simply rejecting community. Now, I don't want you to think that rejecting community is a deliberate choice to reject people and communities. Okay? I want you to understand that's more of an end than the beginning. I'll kind of explain that. If longing for community is a natural state of humanity, then transactional thinking is antithetical to our good nature. But it is also perfectly aligned to the part of our nature that tends to believe that we are not reliant on those around us. And we see this over and over and over again, right? People say, oh, I didn't need my teammates. I could have won this on my own, even though they really did need the teammate. Like we tend to overemphasize, our ego tends to overemphasize our role in our success versus the role of others around us in our success. And when you're transactional, it becomes even more so because you are not looking out for the needs of those around you. You're only trying to feed your own ego and your self-importance. And so you say, you know what? I got here because of my hard work and my dedication. Everyone else be danged. Like, it doesn't matter. Nobody else matters at that point. So it is that the rejection of community is not the beginning point, but the end point. It's not that we deliberately say, hey, we don't need other people. But because we are transactional and we feel that we got to where we are without the community and without its help, the rejection of the community becomes the natural end point. That is to say that a person doesn't deliberately say they don't need others, but because they refuse to see how those around us influence and add to our success, they then drive away community in the end. And more importantly, they deprive their communities of its greatest asset, which is themselves. That transactional thinking is dangerous and requires a vigilance to make sure that we're being relational and that we're imparting value to our communities and our community structures, but at the same time, we understand the value that it provides us. This episode is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Please use the coupon code MAP for 20% off all your orders at strikeforceenergy.com. For all your energy needs, Strikeforce Energy. strikeforceenergy.com. Coupon code MAP for 20% off. Now, back to the 5 laws of relationship, which leads us to our 5th and final law of relationship: second mile service. The belief from this comes from Matthew 5:41. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, this one is better in the context of Jesus' time. A Roman soldier could compel any Jew on a road to help them carry their stuff. Now, they could do this out of necessity or out of laziness. It didn't matter the motivation. But the law stated that they could only be compelled to do so for 1 mile and 1 mile only. But here, Jesus is proclaiming that they go 2. What? The Roman soldiers had great leeway within the territories they had to enforce and carry out Pax Romana. Their tax structure was far from just. If there was ever an example of a people not deserving of second mile service, it was the Romans and their soldiers. However, the instruction here is clear. Go above and beyond what is asked of you, even by those who don't deserve it. Our first lesson here is radically exceeding expectations is a winning strategy. Now, can you imagine the look on the Roman soldier's face? He gets to the 1 mile mark, and this Jew he has picked up to carry his stuff just keeps on trucking on. What is going on? Even the deepest resentment and hurt can be melted away by doing the unexpected, and radically exceeding expectations is the best place to be. Man, I don't care if it is with your team, your church, or in your home. Do you overpromise and underdeliver, or do you radically exceed expectations? Now, on the goal front, I have but a few times faced a metric that I did not beat or an expectation I did not exceed. And a lot of times, this wasn't just a personal metric. I had to get whole teams engaged in a way that would exceed the goal. And sometimes these things aren't easy. Leadership seldom is, but if you are engaged in the fight, more on that in a moment, and you are able to break the metric down into why it is important, give a pathway to success, you will witness greatness that your team didn't even know they could achieve. And your customers will have had their expectations radically exceeded, and that is a very winning strategy. Our second lesson is that trust is tied to dependability. Trust is the lifeblood of relationship. A part of that equation is understanding that the people in your life have to know that you will be there when needed. In other words, you can't go 2 miles if you don't even show up for the first one on a consistent basis. And like I stated before, if you are constantly overpromising and underdelivering, there won't even be a place for a relationship to start and grow. You have to start with that dependability and that trust. And lesson number 3, you cannot be a servant leader without a second mile service attitude. Man, there are so many leadership books on servant leadership, and I agree with a lot of them. So I will not regurgitate much of that here. But you cannot be a servant leader without serving. Kind of goes without saying. And you will not be viewed as serving without second mile service attitude. You have to have that. You have to have a second mile service attitude. And what does that mean? That means that there's presence. That you're not just going the first mile with somebody, but you're also going the second mile with somebody. There is a presence there, a relationship that is insinuated there. You cannot be a servant leader from a distance either. You have to be in the fight with the team. You have to be in the fight with your family. And again, we've said this over and over again. Relationship can't happen at a distance, and neither can servant leadership. As an aside, you cannot be a servant leader without a relational attitude either. It is literally impossible to put others' needs before your own long term if you do not care for what those needs are in the first place. So we know that there's always a law of transaction. And the fifth law of transaction here is meeting expectations. Forget falling short of expectations. We all know that that is a recipe for disaster. Even those with a transactional mindset, while they are more susceptible to failing in this regard, usually the market, their wife, or someone else compels them to go 1 mile. And they will do so. But there is something uncharacteristically cold about merely meeting expectations all the time. Good customer service doesn't live here. Good leadership doesn't live here. Good relationships don't live here either. It is the bare minimum service values that actually leave a rotten taste in our guts. Because we have all interacted with someone who, you know what, they did exactly what they said they would do, but it's not necessarily what was done. It was how it was done. So transaction isn't just about missing the mark. Sometimes it is hitting the mark, because indeed you can't even get transactions without at least hitting the mark. But what we're saying is relationship is that deeper dive to exceeding that on a consistent basis. Man, it has been so good to be here with you and talk to you about these 5 laws of relationship. So in conclusion, we're going to go right back to where we started. 2 roads, 1 relational and 1 transactional. So this is the fork where true change can happen in your life. And I just want to implore you that it is never too late to get back to this fork in the road. Now, it won't magically fix the hurt that has been caused by your transactional thinking. But it is only on this path where true healing can begin. I hope that you have learned a lot. I hope that you have gained some things to think about on your journey. And regardless of whether it is in a boardroom, a church, or in your own family. So think about those 5 laws of relationship. The first law being the golden rule. The second law being that empathy is the gateway to relationship. The third law being that we should show ourselves friendly. The fourth law that we should embrace the community. And of course, that 5th law of having that 2nd mile service. In closing, there are 2 roads, relational, transactional. On which one will you choose to walk? I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed the series as much as we have. Feel free to go through episode 17, where we kind of do a Facebook Live and answer some of your questions related to leadership. As always, you can reach us on all of our socials at Money Power Pod and ask questions. And we're going to get back to the regularly scheduled programming on next week's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. For Rob Johnson, for Jeremiah Martin, I am Nathan Martin. Good night and good luck.
I got the money in the power. Yeah. Once you get a little, they just want to take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long.